আমি বাংলায় গান গাই, আমি বাংলার গান গাই, আমি আমার আমিকে চিরদিন এই বাংলায় খুঁজে পাই। আমি বাংলায় দেখি স্বপ্ন, আমি বাংলায় বাঁধি সুর, আমি এই বাংলার মায়া ভরা পথে হেঁটেছি এতটা দূর। বাংলায় আমার জীবনানন্দ, বাংলা প্রাণের সুর। আমি একবার দেখি, বারবার দেখি, দেখি বাংলার মুখ। বাংলায় আমার জীবনানন্দ, বাংলা প্রাণের সুর। আমি একবার দেখি, বারবার দেখি, দেখি বাংলার মুখ।
Good morning, Saskatchewan. Welcome to our radio show Banglar Gan o Kotha, Stories and Music from Bengal, with your host Jebunnessa Chapola, and technical support is provided by Ranjan Datta. Dear listeners, as you know that each and every week we try to invite our community leaders, community elders, and also artists and many children. They come to our radio show for learning. It's a space for learning. Dear listeners, today we have invited a very special guest. His name is Joseph Naytowhow. He is a Cree musician, actor, storyteller, and educator. He is working with the University of Saskatchewan in the Indigenous Knowledge Keeper position. Dear listeners, let's welcome Joseph. At first, I would like to acknowledge that we live in Treaty 6 territory. As a newcomer, I have learned I'm a guest here in this indigenous land. So, Joseph, my first question would be to you. Many newcomers and refugees, actually, we do not know much. What's the meaning of this acknowledgement? So, would you please explain us the meaning of this acknowledgement?
Thank you, Jebunnessa and Ranjan, for inviting me. Well, it's a long story. A lot of things happened in the future, in the past that aren't really being heard today, because of the silent treatment that we got from the government and from the churches. Or we were just not really significant here, so there wasn't really much that we could say at the time. So, but acknowledgement, what you just did is huge in our community. When somebody says, it's good that you arrived on our land, Not the Canadians who first came here maybe really appreciated arriving here and made good relations initially, but then they saw other things beyond the people that were there. And so they didn't really acknowledge the way that you are doing. And to acknowledge, I guess, is to try to make some sense of what the people did here, who they are, by naming them. I'm a Nihio, right? Nihio is where I come from. And my mother's side is Woodland Cree, and my father's side is Plains Cree. And there's also a mix of Métis in there. So, acknowledgement, that's a beginning. It's good to say, like, for example, when your people came here, like when you arrived here, we would call you Omantiwak. Guests, like you said, Omantiwak. And Omantiwak basically means you don't know how long you're going to be here. You've come and arrived here, So we call you, oh, Umantiwak. These are people that have come from another community or from another country. And we don't know how long they're here. But by saying that, we still acknowledge that you exist. You're a visitor. But we don't really know who you are. When you go further into that relationship, then you become Niwakomaganak. You become my relatives, my brother, my sister. But it's always based on whether I have to get to know your heart and your soul. I have to learn to trust you. To me, that's acknowledgement. You have to trust the people that arrive here and you get to know them. But initially, you just call them a mantiog, they're just passing through, which that's, basically means that, you're just a guest. And until such time that the communities around here who originally lived here welcome you and say that I greet you in their language, it's good that you've arrived. You just continue that from there. You go from there and then you develop a relationship, gradually getting to know each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you for teaching us today. And I have another question. What are some of the common strengths or values or practices that Indigenous peoples and New Canadians share?
Okay, Indigenous people and New Canadians. One of the things that I'm noticing is because I sometimes catch taxi around here, and sometimes I just meet newcomers or immigrants or refugees, that have come to this territory, and just like our people, they look Indigenous, but I don't know what their relationship is back home, whether they were also colonized. But they seem to know more than the general Canadian about what happened here. As I was in a cab one time, and this fellow might have been from Pakistan, and he says, I was talking to my daughter, and my daughter was learning about the residential schools, and so he didn't know about it until his daughter was told about what happened on this land, with kids being abducted, and kidnapped from the reserves. They were not. They put them on reserves first. They put us on reserves, and then they abducted us and kidnapped us and put us in these residential schools. So, I think does that answer that question for now? Sometimes I'll have to keep asking you what the question was because I get rolling and then I got to back up.
Mm-hmm. So, how do we build awareness of Indigenous and newcomer realities and make sure we learn from the past?
Well, you're coming to a territory which is compromised. There's the things that have happened here happened in spite of the Indigenous people being approached. In spite of them living here all this time. Nobody said, "Can we come and share this land with you? We signed a treaty with your ancestors." Nobody said that. They just started surveying the land, back in the 1800s. Without the people, our people were just watching them. Who are these people? They've got these surveyors, walking through the land and marking the land and measuring it, and that's what happened here. They just walked right into our territory, and just started measuring the land as if it was theirs, as if they didn't see us and we were there. We were watching them, and they were living right. They could see us, and they could see my ancestors, my elders and grandparents. They could see them, but they just went right ahead. But so, how do you bring that to today's understanding and with the immigrants that are here and tell them, please don't do the same thing. Please respect the land and recognize that, like you were saying, that you're a guest here. But recognize that other people have lived here, and those people that lived here, Nihiawak, Ipatak, Apitogosanak, Anishinaabe, even Sequatmik, out of BC, the Shuswap, they lived here as well too. The Blackfoot. I'm naming these in their language because that's how we name them, and it's important to name them because that's acknowledges who lived here and who actually was here initially. So you have to recognize that these are different nations that are here, and rather than ignore them, like the Canadian government did, I don't know, where else do we go from there?
Thank you, Joseph, for your wisdom, knowledge, and sharing your how we can learn from you. We really appreciate your suggestion and also recommendation for newcomers.
Yeah.
My question is, when we come to this land, in indigenous land, many of immigrant and refugee communities, we don't know. We don't know what is the meaning of land in this land.
Right.
So I was wondering, how do you explain the meanings of land for the newcomer and immigrant communities?
That's because in the past, it was everything happened at the federal level, like the Canadian government, right? And then the provinces came into being, and we never made an agreement with the provinces, like Saskatchewan. There was never an agreement about how this land would be shared and what could happen on this land. There was never a deal like that. It just the settlers just did it without asking. Now you're asking me about newcomers. Newcomers need to go to the tribal councils or need to go to the hereditary chiefs from this territory and the leadership, and perhaps ask their permission if they can, buy and purchase land from this territory. That doesn't happen. The government, provincial government, they sell the land to newcomers as if nobody lived there. As if they're on. We signed a treaty with the government, yet nobody honors the treaty. There are efforts to teach it now at schools, right? So with newcomers, I think it would be really first, I guess, if they went to the chief, the hereditary chiefs. There's two different levels of leadership here. There's hereditary chiefs, and then there's the chief and council, which is basically maybe they're. It's really hard to talk about this sometimes because we don't really recognize often, the leadership that's defined by government, as the leadership. The true leaders are the ones that are hereditary to the land. They've always been, it's the old custom, they've always been the leaders in my mind. I'm a hereditary chief in my family, in my namesake, That's a given, right? But the government created these reserves, and then they created this kind of like a leadership model based on their government, the way that they do things. And there's a way to control the people. And so, we had just a little, like back home in Sturgeon Lake, we have 10 square miles. It's increasing more with treaty land entitlement because the government is starting to be open to returning lands that had been stolen. So, that's in that situation itself, they're starting to make changes, but still, those chief and council are still dictated by the government. They have almost complete control. We don't have self-reliance. We don't have a financial base to run our own governments. We should have had that because we had technically owned all this territory, but who benefited? The settlers benefited. Newcomers are benefiting today because they're buying out land through deals with the government, the provincial governments now. So they're taking up land that they don't realize was, again, it was a stolen land. So just acknowledge that, okay, I'm on Treaty 4 territory, I'm on Treaty 6, I'm on Treaty 2, Treaty 3, and Anishinaabe are there, the Nihiog are there, all this, you have to acknowledge and approach them, go right to their home and say, I'm sorry, but I made a deal with the government, the province here. I bought land over here. How should I live on it? How should I honor and respect this relationship? It's a matter of just communicating and asking them and creating a relationship, a new one, right? Because it never happened before. It never happened before. Never happened before. I can tell you that because back in my territory in Sturgeon Lake, the land, we used to go to George River, Candle Lake, all those places, just north of Sturgeon Lake by Prince Albert. We used to go all around that area hunting and gathering, and we just live out there in the summertime. But as soon as I was taking residential school, bang, this land base just decreased slower and slower. My grandmother once used to go out to the land and pick medicine, skin the moose over there, make dry meat, and we just lived beautifully. It was pristine. The land was very clean. And then I kept going home in the summertime because I was in Prince Albert, the residential school in PA. So when I was there, things were happening, between deals were being made by the federal government and the provincial government. So, so they were making these kinds of deals. So the land base, the settlers were being just slowly encroaching our territory and slowly being settled into Waskesiu area, Christopher Lake, all those areas, all that area that we used to just use for hunting and gathering. All of a sudden, this is kind of a difficult topic, but my grandmother was sitting just outside of our old house with my uncles and grandparents built. They built this house. And now my grandmother is just sitting outside with a dry meat rack and, making bannock and making dry meat, and crushing choke cherries right there. So that land base, just shrunk right to that reserve, right to the back, right to the... It's just, it's just a piece. It's not even as pristine as when you're out in the bush, and it's so beautiful out there, and you can hear the birds. You can hear the sounds of nature. All of a sudden, here we are, just right beside the house, and my grandmother is sitting there. It's really a pitiful situation when I saw as I was growing up. I saw all this. That's the truth, eh? But thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. You explained very nicely. And we came here in Saskatchewan almost 10 years now. And I have seen, including me, many people, they don't know the meanings of treaties that you explain. If you can little bit explain what does actually treaty mean to you, and how new immigrant and refugee community, they should learn the meanings of treaties when they're coming here.
Maybe I should explain love, maybe I should explain kindness, maybe I should explain respect, maybe I should explain, raise your child and your family beautifully and well. Those are the things that are part of treaty. Those are all we wanted. That's all we asked, We didn't, treat your mother the way that you would treat the land. Treat the land the way you treat your mother. Those are the things, treat your mother. Those are the things that we, that are the foundation of treaties. It was nothing more, nothing less, But treaties essentially were, I think our elders from the past were prepared for maybe a showdown or something, because that's why they signed a treaty. They either kill us off with smallpox blankets, using smallpox, which happened in my community. Peter Pond, I forget it was, but there's a man that came and killed several of our people in our community many years ago. And the treaties, was that treaty, Okay, we'll sign a treaty as a way of acknowledging, that this is your land, But on the other hand, we'll slowly kill you off, we'll slowly annihilate you and to change you and make you one of us. That's the understanding of the treaty based on the newcomers, Europeans that came here. Not newcomers, but I guess back then they were. And so that's the treaty that I understand had 15 principles, and those are some of the things I was telling you about, the principles about living and sharing this land equally. That's one of the things. Living in truth, and living with with humility, with respect, or it's all in those words, and I don't think the other signatories, the Canadian people really understood what or maybe they didn't take time. They didn't want to because they had a different agenda. But the treaties that were signed were very strong. They were signed in front of a sacred, just like people would sign something or put their hand on a Bible. They made an agreement based on a spiritual being, It was a spiritual agreement. We called it Stismawasnaken. The elder brothers, document, and the elder brother is actually our helper on the other side in the spirit world. So we call him Ustismau, the elder brother, and in the same, I guess you could say the same breath, that other spiritual leaders who spoke on behalf of their own people had that same position. They were looked up to and they were asked, prior to making any agreements, with other nations, for the guidance. And so we did that, So the treaty was guided from a spiritual place, not from ordinary place. So that's, and if you look at the Office of Treaty Commissioner website, it sets out all the terms and conditions why treaties were made, in this territory. Treaty 6, for example, we were promised, and to have, say, a medicine chest, for example. We're promised education, we're promised economic development, we're promised all these things, just in exchange for signing the agreement. And then somehow the treaty got tweaked so that the land property became owned by settlers. It was tweaked by lawyers, from what I hear. That could be hearsay, but when you come from an oral spoken community and tradition, words that are testimonials coming from your soul and your heart for us speak to the truth. So when elders of the past say, we didn't agree to those things. We said this, but when we got the treaty document, it said that the new settlers would have all rights to the property, and the Indigenous people would be that we had given it up. Never gave it up. Who would do that? Somebody would be pretty crazy to do that. Even young kids. I did that reenactment of that treaty with the young kids in grade 5 in the city here. They could understand the difference between sharing and agreeing to share the land, as opposed to somebody just taking full ownership. They could understand something as simple as that. So who in their right mind would ever give up, the land? And we were only supposed to go. They were never to dig beyond the shovel length of the earth. But what do you do? You just gouge Mother Earth and go into her to get all the minerals, right? We never said that they could do that. So anyway, that's kind of like there's a lot to the treaty.
Thank you so much. You explained lots of new knowledge for me. As you know, lots of immigrants, they are coming every year from various countries for making new life here, making new ways of living for secured life.
Yeah.
And many immigrant and refugee I have seen in my last 10 years in Canada have many misconceptions about concept of reconciliation, or they don't have opportunity to learn. So what is the actually meaning should be the reconciliation for immigrant communities, and how should they take it as a forms of responsibilities, not only just learning or acknowledging, how it can be part of their responsibility so that they can learn it and then practice it?
Good question. Yeah, you need to know first what happened, right? You need to be informed. Public education is very helpful. I had a good conversation with some friends last night, and we talked about exactly about what we're talking about here now. And newcomers, it's going to be a challenge, you know, for them to, I think, to learn rapidly, you know, because you need to live with the people. You need to go to their ceremonies. You need to go to their dances. You know, like if you really want to understand how you can help, come to my community. We have sun dances, we have powwows, we have sweat lodge. So you can see the people, to me, at their best when they're using their gifts, you know, to share with the world. Gifts, you know, to share with the world. That's one of the things, you know, some people, newcomers, even my fellow Canadians, they come to our sweat or they come to our sun dances, which is an annual ceremony which happens every year, and it happens within a 4-year cycle. So for 4 years, so if you go to a sun dance, for example, 4 years and fast and be with the people, you'll get to know them, and you'll also get to understand how we navigate in this territory. You know, so that's one thing I would recommend. You know, if you want to know me, come and sweat with me, come and dance with me. You know, come to our lodge and sing and hear us, you know, and hear our songs and what do our songs mean. And that would be a good start, you know. Like, as far as, there's not, you're living here already, so we can't say go back home, you know. We can't tell you we don't want to do that. We never have. It's not really our way to do things, to, you know, tell people what to do, you know. Things that have progressed so far, I know that it's hard to change. But learn the language of one of the cultures here, whether it's Anishinaabe, and you'll get to know the language, and you get to know the mind of the people here, how they think, and then that's how you will treat. That's how you would treat the people. You know, that's how you develop a relationship with them. When you arrive there, let me know how it goes, because a lot of people have never arrived there. They don't even know that residential school existed here. We're still at scratch, even though the Office of Treaty Commissioner has been doing educational workshops for the last 25, 30 years with teachers all across Saskatchewan. It's only beginning to be recognized and acknowledged, you know. So get to know what happened, you know. Get to know me, what I went through. I live with this every day. I live with genocide. I live with, you know, racism every day, every moment of my life. So that's all I can say for now.
Thank you, Joseph. We have actually many more questions and a lot to learn. But I think we need to take a short break, and after the break, we will come back again. And dear listeners, together we are trying to learn about many Indigenous perspectives and how we can build a bridge among Indigenous communities and newcomers, settlers and refugees. So, Joseph, again, the same question actually. I think we haven't discussed enough. So how newcomers and new immigrants can learn the concept of reconciliation?
Yeah, it's for us. It's not as much reconciliation. We've never had anything to reconcile. You know, it's more conciliation at this point. You know, people always say reconciliation. No, we have nothing to reconcile. We know our story. We know our history. We know what's happened. You know, it's the Canadian people that need to reconcile. It's newcomers are just coming into this picture, this story, and they're having more open-mindedness and curious about what's happened here because they've been persecuted in their own country. So they come here for refuge, right? And we gladly take them in. Every opportunity I get, if I'm riding a taxi or I meet a newcomer from Afghanistan or Pakistan or India or, you know, Sudan and in Africa, all these people that come here, I welcome them to this territory, and I give them a little brief explanation, you know, and where they are, like what the situation is, and they listen. I'm really so so happy when they listen from their heart. You know, they're hearing my truth. You know, when you have an Indigenous person or First Nation, Nihio, Anishinaabe, Batak, these people that lived here for all these times, you know, all these years, if you have them, if they're at that point where they can actually speak without really slamming the government or the church, you know, and talking truthfully about the relationship, you know, that's taxed here, you have the beginnings of change, you know, at least the beginnings. You're just scratching the surface of at least starting to listen to each other. It would never happen back in the 1800s. But if you have that today, you're very fortunate, because a lot of these people, their voices have been shut right down. They weren't allowed to speak. We weren't even allowed to gather together as more than one person. If we ever gathered in 2s and 3s and 5s, heaven forbid, the RCMP would come and then split us up. They said, you can't gather together, because when you gather together, you're too strong. You know, the circle is very strong when it's all one. Now, we're doing that now. You know, we're gradually getting stronger because we're able to speak for ourselves. Like you're hearing me, 20 years ago, I couldn't say these things, you know, because I felt like the government was still, you know, just hovering around my head, you know, or the government was come around and you're going to try and shut my voice down. But my voice was shut down already because of what I went through with the residential school, right? My voice was already clamped, pretty shut, you know, from that experience. It's hell. It is like hell to go through that. But I went through it, and there must have been a reason. You know, I have to acknowledge that I went through what they put me through, and I've come out of it, you know, fairly unscathed, you know, but I'm still working through that. But at least I can talk. I can speak. And the elders always talked about, you know, the most important things, you know, when you're about human conduct is what you say, how you think, and how you walk. Those are paramount. And when you think about those three things, you also think about walking with, speaking with, and thinking with, with kindness, with love, with empathy, with empathy. Those are the basic, you know, principles that we're guided by in our ceremonies from our elders. So I live by those, you know. It's not easy because I got all this stuff boiling inside of me because of what happened as a child, you know, when I was 6 years old, taken away from my grandparents and put in a school for 13 years, only to go home for the summers, you know, between June and August, and then again picked up. It was a perfect system to annihilate us and to change who we are, to take the Indian out of us, I guess they say. I know I hate hearing that, you know, because it's something that was planned back in the 1800s, you know. Duncan Campbell Scott's a famous guy in our community in Canada here, and sometimes glorified, you know. There's a statue of him. But for us, it's like it's a really black mark in our history, you know, because he wasn't in his right mind, in my feeling. You know, a lot of the people that the forefathers of this country were not thinking about the Indigenous people. They were thinking about themselves and their people. But I'm glad you're here to at least listen to this story and hear what I have to say. That's a beginning. That's a really good start, you know, and then from there we can, I guess to say move forward. We'll move forward very gently and very quietly and lovingly and kindly and respectfully together, you know. Let's not step ahead of each other, you know. If we see a little diamond down the road, let's not, you know, let's both run to that diamond. Let's, you know, you see it, beautiful, pristine water. Well, let's run to it together, you know. Let's walk over there together and share that, you know, and enjoy it and appreciate it. It shouldn't be that difficult, but it is.
Joseph, many people do not understand Indigenous spirituality. Can you please explain us what is spirituality?
Okay, you got 40, 50 years? Because it took me a long time, Since I was 20 years old, I'm 67 now. And just slowly understanding that aspect of who I am as a nihio. But spirituality, we always, maybe you could say, I sometimes say that we're a spirit-based, dream-based culture. In my culture, nihio, we have to, anything that we undertake, in this world, in this life, before you can actually act on it, there's a message from the spirit, you dream about it. We're dream spirit people. So we dream about it. For example, I dreamt about the sweat lodge. So that was going to be my role, my responsibility to help people through the sweat lodge, which is like a steam bath, but beyond that. And you can help people heal physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. So that's part of the spirituality. It's practical. It's connected to the land. So when I'm connected to the land, in terms of the sweat lodge, I have to honor the willow. I have to honor the stones. I have to honor the earth. I have to honor the relationship between this earth plane and the spirit plane. I have to honor that, all of that, just within this one. And there's many of those ceremonies that still are thrive all across Canada. They're still very much alive. As I sit here, I try to smudge each day, or at least I think about the people in West Coast with the Wet'suwet'en, that are struggling right now because they want to build a pipeline down there. There's reasons for why we want to stop that. We know what the outcome will be, but our Canadian cousins, they don't seem to understand. They don't seem to get the picture. They just want to do what they've always done. They've always been oppressors. Maybe that's all they know. Until something different, until we stand up for ourselves and stand up to them and say, hey, treat us equally. We're humans just like you are. We're not something really, we're not aliens or anything. We're not strange people that are in your way. We're just trying to be helpful as well. We're trying to help the world. Help us to help the world. Help us to heal you. It seems like it's our fellow Canadians need a lot of healing. They need a lot of... And newcomers, I'm glad you're open to at least listening to our story and, making sense of what happened. That's the first step, what happened. A lot of people will know what happened, but they wouldn't know. They might not believe it at first. It has to sink in. It takes time for that to be embodied and realize what happened. So it requires grieving for the people that are here. I still grieve for my own people. They're still suffering. There's still a lot of intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. And I'm responsible for that partly because I was raised a Canadian and I beat my own kids, I was not very helpful. I ignored my own kids. I didn't love my children. What can you do? And the way that you were raised was to not love your community, not love your people, not love where you came from. That's the way it translated for me once I was out of there. I was supposed to learn to love Canada. Mm-hmm. But
as an insider of the newcomer community, what I'm observing and I have experienced in my personal life, that there are a lot of religious racism are around, and that people are coming from all over the world, and they are practicing variety of religions. So what I have experienced and observed that these religions are preventing to learn about spirituality. And so what do you think, how we can overcome this challenge?
It happens all the way down into our community as well. Our community level, we have factions because of still the European religions, they're just still exist in our communities, So the traditionalists and the religious people, we're still fighting with each other, because the traditionalists say one thing about how to honor Mother Earth, and the religious people may say the same thing, but they're coming from their place, right? So I was an Anglican on my mother's side. On my mother's side, I'm an Anglican, but I don't practice the Anglican Church because I don't really. There's good values there, but I prefer the traditional way of thinking and doing things. But a lot of people were forced to become Catholics or Christians or Anglicans. They were forced to become that, so they did. And for some reason, that caused a conflict between the traditional people who are more land-based, and spirit-based, and so the Catholics and the Anglicans always are at odds with each other. And the Catholics always want to say that we're worshiping the demon, the devil, by what we're doing. It's because they've been told that by the churches over the years. So that's a misunderstanding. We need to. That happens. You're right. It's still a religious conflict in our communities. So that has to be. They need to come together. It's slowly coming together, but it's going to take time. Once you're a Christian, you're a Christian. When you're a traditionalist and you were born and taught in that way, you understand what it is. But until the Christians and the Catholics, and Anglicans, Baptists, Protestants come over and recognize that, okay, they have a way of life, a way of knowing, a way of praying, that's not so different from ours, and there's nothing wrong with that, it shouldn't be in conflict. But there's more to that story, but I can't really share that on the air here, but if you come to our lodge, you'll get more information, if you really want to know how that works,
It's a lot of learning for me, and it's very positive learning, empowering learning.
Yeah.
I can share with my own experience. When I came here, I didn't have that opportunity to learn about Indigenous history, Indigenous knowledge, people about and land-based education, and it's also today still the same. It's maybe situation is slowly improving, but once newcomer and immigrant communities, they are coming and they don't have opportunity to learn knowledge from elders or knowledge keeper directly, and it's easy to get the very wrong conception is going on in the ear, and easy to get this Western knowledge and use it in everyday practice, and it's become the new colonial tools for the many indigenous communities here. So how do you think indigenous community at very first place, when they are coming from various places to here to building their own belongingness, where they should learn the first-hand knowledge?
The last part, what did you say again? Last part of it?
Where the new immigrant or refugee community, they should learn about indigenous people and about this land and what they should do from the first place.
Yeah, it's. I think first, I guess probably the first thing is get to know me, as I was saying before. Get to know me, get to know my language. If you're serious, try to get a name in this community, in one of the different indigenous cultures, or Nihiyoiwin or Anishinaabe, and that'll alter your mind. If you get a name that is gifted to you from one of the people here, it's a very powerful thing to even acquire a name from this land. That's a huge thing, and once you have that, you'll see the world differently. I know that because I was fortunate to be given a name in my late 20s when I didn't expect it, but at the moment, at first it didn't mean much, and so to be named is one thing, and it's like you're okay, now I'm part of the spirit of this land, I will now walk in the way that these people begin to walk, So that's only a beginning, Ranjan and Jebunnessa. That's only a beginning. So I'm sure you understand that based on your own culture. You'll have the people that understand, the newcomers who have their own language or have their own culture, have their own beliefs. They seem to be more understanding to the indigenous cultures here because of that. And I feel that. I can sense that with you and with other people that I meet here around the city. I could sense, I could feel it. And I also feel that with some people that live in Saskatoon or Canadians who undertake that journey to understand indigenous cultures, who started teaching themselves about what the history is. So I'm starting to see that. It's slow but sure. But if you got your language base, you got your spirituality, you come from a place where you've suffered. You understand the people here who still suffer to this day. So recognize that people are still suffering here. Try to help them. Try to make them understand that you're not here to do what has happened in the past. You're not here to repeat history. Because I know there's a lot of land being bought out, by new people, immigrants, newcomers, all around Saskatchewan. So get to know who you're buying from, and are you buying it from Canadians, provincial government, or are you buying it from the Indigenous people? It should actually be from the Indigenous people, not the province or the federal government. They don't have no right to that land.
As Canada slowly moves towards reconciliation with its Indigenous communities, many are asking what role should immigrants be playing in this process?
Okay, I'm still thinking about
Broad
it.
question.
Say it again, just say it one more time.
So as Canada slowly moves towards reconciliation with its Indigenous communities, and many are asking what role should immigrants be playing in this process?
It's
maybe it would be interesting if we could hear from an immigrant voice too, but let's hear your perspective first. And actually we have a plan to do some more series of work like this, so in future maybe we'll be doing more collaborative work with immigrant and Indigenous elders.
My take on that is I want to get to know the newcomers that come here. I want to go, and I partaked in some of their ceremonies and their traditions, and it's not a one-sided thing ever. Like if I'm getting to know you, if you're getting to know me, we need to exchange traditions, exchange ways of learning, exchange knowledges, right? And we need to sit down and just visit and talk about these and do things together. That's the first thing, Never mind everything else outside of that, right? It's just developing a relationship, and I think Canada's making an effort towards that. But they're dealing with a long history of oppression and genocide, and it's not going to be easy for Canadians. There's some of their own people that are actually giving up land, to the Indigenous people that are near to that they had land. So you see that if you listen to CBC, they talk about good people giving up lands that they know that their grandparents, their ancestors had taken without knowing that it was Indigenous land. So they're returning it. So that's a good thing, and so that's happening just from Canadians in general. Now, what needs to happen here maybe is more, we need to understand, we need to tell this to the corporations, we need to tell this to the church states, because a lot of them still control and own 95, 98% of this land across the land, or they try to, or they want to. They feel like it's theirs, They have never acknowledged, okay, well, let's share this 98% of land that we took from you. Let's take a look at this once again, and let's try to right this situation. Because in Saskatchewan, you take a $5 bill and you take a rip off at the end, that little piece of paper you rip at the corner, that's the First Nation land, Indigenous land, Métis land. That's all we have. The rest is owned by farmers and settlers and newcomers, they own all that. But when I went to Regina, there's a residential industrial school just west of there, and some Asian people bought some land there, but they were kind enough to leave this one area of land where this industrial school, Regina Industrial School, was built long time ago. It's no longer there, but many children died there. But the Asian people, they gave back land for free back to the people who were part of that history. So like my people were down there, they went to that school, they maybe never came back. They died in the school, the Regina Industrial School. So there's slow things that newcomers are doing, they're seeing. And I've just heard that Lac Peltier, there's several acres that they're building an ashram over there. The Muslims have bought land, by Lac Peltier, and the Métis were quite concerned because it was their land. Nobody talked to them, but the Surf Current Real Estate or whoever, just sold that land to newcomers. So how are they going to invite the Indigenous people in that territory? There's Cree down there, Nihiyawak. There's Métis down there, Apishtawissanik, they're down there as well. So what are they going to do to acknowledge? They need to welcome them into their traditional ceremonies. They need to invite them and say, let's have a ceremony, let's bless this land together. That's what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Joseph, we don't have much time in our hand, so before we go home, I have last question for you, but we will continue this discussion, of course. And what is my understanding to understand this building bridge work, it is important to learn about decolonization. And we hear a lot about decolonization, but many people have limited knowledge to understand the meaning of decolonization. So will you please explain what does decolonization mean for newcomers?
Well, it means you have to recognize me as part of a nation state, that I'm sovereign to this land. Nihiyawak, Sagawinawak, Muskegowinawak, which is the Woodland Cree, Muskeg Cree, Plains Cree, Pasquawinawak, acknowledge us as having nationhood status in this country. The government doesn't want to do that because they have interests in this land. And I've always had that, So if you acknowledge us as having a nationhood status and we are sovereign to this territory and that we are the keepers of this territory and we're kind of the watchdogs, we're the guardians of this territory, then acknowledge us that way. That's part of decolonization. When people, don't make the effort to decolonize, they just recognize us as maybe as wards of the state. We're not wards of the state, The government likes to believe that we're still under the Queen, We're not. We moved beyond that. We're starting to take responsibility for our own communities. But to decolonize means we need to have more of a land base. So we need more land. We need to have financial independence. We need to be respected as human beings, and that we've if the Canada decided one day to pay the rent for the land that they are using, they'd never be able to pay it all. They've rented this land since 500 years ago, and they've never paid. I mean, they've made some agreements, but the money that we get, they used to say that out of $1, the Indigenous people in Canada got 10 cents. They got a dime for, in the terms of resources, right? So just to decolonize is what you're talking about here, is to begin sharing the land. If you have land, share it with the people, or at least invite them to become part of your land and welcome them back to their own land. They say, this is your land. You know, you can come and pick medicine here. Yeah, we won't put it in. Tell us about this land. Come and teach us about how to respect this land. So let's walk together.
I know it's a very deep question. Maybe it takes a whole hour to discuss. But it's just a start today with our radio show to discuss about all this topic that you have shared your knowledge. So thank you very much, dear listeners. We will keep continuing this discussion. So stay tuned with Banglar Gano Kotha. Thank you so much, Joseph, again, and thank you so much, Ranjan Datta, for giving your technical support and for bringing your